Can chains hold silence when silence becomes fire? That is the question the old folks never quite answer, but always leave hanging like breath caught in a southern wind. The fields outside St. Laurent Parish in Louisiana are quiet now. No cotton grows there. No birds sing. Just the low rustle of wind brushing over rows of withered earth and the creak of rusted iron swinging from the lone gallows tree. They say her name was Rachel. They say her silence was thicker than blood and twice as dangerous. The children in the parish don't dare walk near those fields, not after dusk, not ever. The elders say it's cursed land, that fire still lives in the soil, hiding beneath the skin of the earth, waiting to breathe again. The chains hanging from that tree have no bark to cling to anymore, just smooth, dead wood scorched black and trembling. Sometimes, in late October when the air smells of old sugar and distant rain, folks claim to hear a faint rattle near the tree line. Not loud, not angry, just the sound of metal remembering something. Once a preacher tried to bless the land. He left before nightfall, shaking and pale, his cross burned at the edges. There are spirits here, he said, but none that ever heard of God. And always the name Rachel returns, spoken in whispers, spit out like tobacco or held in trembling reverence. She was a slave, they say. One who didn't cry when the lash came down, one who stared through her chains as if she saw a world past fire. One who burned a cotton empire to the roots without ever lifting her voice above silence. Some call her wicked, some call her holy. But all remember what they found after the blaze: no body, just ash, a half-melted chain, and a scorched cotton stalk shaped like a cross. The wind still carries her name. The ground still rejects the cotton that once fed kings, and the chains still swing not from memory but from warning. Because silence, once set alight, never stops burning. And Rachel, they say, never truly died. The sun over St. Laurent does not shine, it punishes. It beats down on the backs of the enslaved like a second overseer, burning through worn dresses and calloused skin. Rachel moves through rows of cotton that stretch beyond the eye, her fingers raw, bleeding into the white balls as if staining the very wealth that enslaved her. Sweat clings to her body like a second skin, stinging where lashes have torn fresh welts across her back. But her face never changes. She does not cry, she does not scream, she does not beg. She simply works. Overseer Holt watches her closely. A red-faced man with cracked lips and a voice like a whip itself, Holt enjoys the noise, the screams, the weeping, the breaking. He calls Rachel the mute devil when he drinks, muttering about her dead eyes and that cursed quiet. One morning he strikes her across the face for not saying yes, suh. The blow snaps her neck sideways. Blood drips from her lip. She straightens, looks at him, says nothing. He raises the whip again, then lowers it. Something in her silence makes his grip falter. Mistress Caroline, the master's wife, is a different kind of cruelty. She never strikes. Never yells. She merely acts as if Rachel does not exist. Commands fall from her lips like crumbs to a dog. You, the dark one, fix the lace, boil the cloth, watch the child, but don't touch her. She never calls her by name. At night, Rachel sleeps on dirt beside the smokehouse. Her hands twitch in her sleep, still plucking cotton. Her back sticks to the fabric of her torn dress, crusted in blood. Sometimes the younger ones ask why she doesn't run, why she doesn't fight. Rachel only blinks, and the quiet becomes heavier than the lash. Others break. They scream. They fall to their knees. They die with names choked between sobs. But Rachel endures, not out of obedience, not out of fear. But because her silence is not surrender, it is waiting. And every hour under the sun, every insult, every crack of the whip is just more heat added to a fire no one sees, not yet, but soon. The child came early. Born too small, too quiet, too still. Rachel lay on a blood-soaked rag in the corner of the smokehouse, the scent of burnt meat clinging to the rafters above her. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her body wrecked from labor in secret, with only old Mary from the quarter to catch the baby in the dark. A girl, thin as a branch with fingers like curled threads. Rachel reached out, just once, just enough to brush the child's damp forehead. But before the moment could settle, Overseer Holt burst in. He looked down, squinted, then grunted. "Ain't worth the effort. She won't last the night." Rachel didn't speak. Her arms stayed outstretched. Holt kicked a bucket aside and yanked the child from Mary's hands. "Better this way, one less mouth, you done birthed a burden." And just like that, the baby was gone. No ceremony, no name, not even a cloth to wrap her in. By evening, Rachel was forced back into the fields, her dress still stained, her legs shaking. The others didn't meet her eyes, they knew. When the bell rang for nightfall, Rachel didn't return to her quarters. She slipped behind the smokehouse, then down past the fence where they dumped spoiled meat and broken tools. She dug with her bare hands, dug through mud and bone and roots until her nails split and her fingers bled. She found nothing. No tiny grave, no linen bundle, no trace of the girl who had flickered into the world like a candle only to be snuffed out without breath. The stars above were quiet. The moon was a slit in the sky, and Rachel's silence changed. It did not break, it honed, like a knife pressed slow against a whetstone. That night she sat in the hollow she'd dug and pressed her hand to her belly, now flat and aching. She did not cry, she did not scream. But in her chest something turned, something ancient like the grinding of stone beneath water. The field had taken her blood. The whip had taken her skin. The master had taken her name, but the child they had taken without burial. And that would be remembered. After the baby, something in Rachel shifted. She did her work, picked cotton, boiled linens, stoked the fire beneath the washtub, but it was different now, each movement too precise, too quiet. As if she were no longer doing the work of the living, but rehearsing for something the dead had asked of her. She did not speak, not even to old Mary, not even when blood ran down her arm from a split in her palm. Her silence thickened, not out of fear but purpose. Rachel watched. She watched the way Master Felix always reached for his brandy after sundown, the way his hands trembled slightly when unlocking the sugar ledger. She tracked Mistress Caroline's daily walks around the veranda, how she paused exactly 7 steps in to adjust her bonnet and glare at the horizon like it owed her something. Rachel memorized the creak of every floorboard in the big house, the sound of wind through the cane fields, and the hour at which Holt slipped away behind the stables to light his pipe. Nothing escaped her. She moved like dusk, slow, unseen, but always there. The other slaves began to whisper, not out of gossip but unease. They stepped aside when she passed. Even Big Abram, who once laughed loud and cursed the sky, spoke softer when she was near. "She got eyes like smoke," someone said once when they thought she couldn't hear. "Like the fire's already in 'em, just waitin' for a match." Even the preacher started keeping his distance. At Sunday gathering, when others bowed their heads and hummed the old hymns, Rachel remained still. Her eyes stayed open. Not defiant, just awake. As if she saw something behind the preacher's words, something older than the book, something that didn't believe in salvation, only in balance. The lash had failed, hunger had failed, the grave had failed. Now only her silence remained, and it watched everything. It began with the chickens. One by one they vanished, no feathers, no blood, just empty coops and claw marks in the dirt that led nowhere. Holt blamed the foxes, then the slaves. He beat 3 men and a boy before sunrise, but still the chickens kept disappearing. Then the cotton bales spoiled. Perfectly picked, and packed cotton turned sour in the loft, damp, reeking of rot, crawling with worms that had no business being there. Holt swore someone was cursing the land. He brought in a traveling conjure man with a glass eye and a sack of bones. The man took one look at Rachel standing at the edge of the yard and left without a word. Said the price of lifting the curse was more than gold could buy. Mistress Caroline began to sleep in the parlor, afraid to close her eyes in the bedroom. She told the cook she saw a woman standing at the foot of her bed each night, tall, dark, dripping with chains that didn't clink, just hung there, still and silent. The woman never moved, never blinked. Just stared. "She don't want my soul," Caroline whispered once through trembling lips. "She wants my fire." In the quarters, the whispers began. They didn't say Rachel's name, they didn't have to. "She walkin' with something," they muttered. "Something old. The fire's common, you smell it. Lord help the one who lays a hand on her now." Even the whip began to fear her. Holt raised it once after she spilled water near the porch. The tip hovered in the air, curled like a snake, unsure of its strike. Rachel didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Just raised her eyes, slow and heavy, until they locked with his. Something passed between them in that moment. Not fear, not threat, recognition. Holt lowered the whip, walked away without a word. That night, smoke rose faintly from the edges of the fields, though no fires were lit. And in the cotton rows, when the wind stirred just right, the stalks didn't rustle, they shivered, as if the land itself had begun to remember pain. Before the silence, before the fields, there was the river. Rachel had been 9 when she watched her mother walk barefoot into the bayou at dusk, the cicadas screaming in the trees like they knew something no one else dared say aloud. Her mother, Lena, had taken the last whipping that morning. Skin torn open like pages in a book, blood soaking through the back of her dress. She'd barely stood upright as she cooked, cleaned, and stitched lace for Mistress Caroline's Sunday gown. Not a tear, not a moan, just the same tired song humming low in her throat. That night she kissed Rachel's forehead, her lips hot and cracked. "Baby," she whispered, "remember this. Chains rust, but fire leaves nothing behind." Then she turned and walked into the bayou. Rachel had followed at a distance, barefoot too, her breath caught in her throat. The water was dark and thick with rot, mosquitoes swarming like tiny curses. Lena waded in waist deep, then chest, then neck. The last thing Rachel saw was her mother's hand gripping the air, then the scream that never came, just bubbles and stillness. They never found the body, said the gators must have taken her, but Rachel knew her mother didn't run, didn't fight, she chose. Chose the water over the whip, chose silence over chains, chose memory over mercy, and Rachel carried that with her like a splinter in her soul. Now, years later, she remembered that night every time the wind blew through the sugarcane and smelled like river mud. She remembered when the whip cracked near her spine. She remembered when Holt laughed and Mistress Caroline smiled like porcelain. And she began to gather bits of dried moss from beneath the kitchen steps, a sliver of mirror glass from a broken frame wrapped in cloth hidden in her dress hem, a tin cup half filled with lantern oil she poured carefully each day from the master's supply. Tiny things. Forgotten things. But Rachel remembered, not with words, with hands, with silence, with fire waiting. Rachel moved like dusk, slow, certain, impossible to stop once she began. She never ran, she never hid. She simply walked. At night when the quarters slept, she drifted through the rows of cotton like a shadow too tired to scare anyone. In her apron, tucked beneath spare thread and broken clothespins, were clumps of dried moss wrapped in linen, soaked slowly in stolen oil. She laid them in the fields one by one, at the base of the oldest cotton stalks, beneath the wooden troughs where dry husks gathered, near the back wall of the overseer's shack where the lantern hooks rusted loose. Every step, every placement calculated, a trail of breathless tinder waiting to be named. The lantern vanished 3 nights before Thanksgiving. Holt cursed and tore through the tool shed, slapping a boy for looking at him the wrong way, but no one confessed. Rachel had already buried the lantern behind the stable, hidden beneath a board rotted soft with rain. The fire was coming, but not yet. She passed young Caleb near the well, a wide-eyed boy with hands too small for the work he was made to do. He stared at her apron, the scent of oil hanging faint in the air. "You fixin' to light up the sky?" he asked, almost a whisper. Rachel turned, her eyes dark and still met his. She raised one finger to her lips, a single motion, not a threat, not a promise, just silence sharpened. The next morning the birds did not sing. Mistress Caroline stood on the veranda, wrapped in a shawl too fine for the warmth of the air. She looked toward the cotton fields and frowned. "It's too still," she said. "Not natural, even the crows are gone." Evening fell like a held breath. In the distance, thunder rolled, but no storm followed, and Rachel stood in the field's far edge, her apron now empty, her hands tucked behind her back. The ground beneath her feet held its silence. But beneath the silence, something waited, dry, hungry, listening for a spark. They caught her at dusk. The stolen lantern clutched in her hand, half filled with the oil she'd been rationing drop by drop. She stood near the barn, face blank, not running, not hiding, just waiting. Holt's face turned purple with rage. Spittle flew from his mouth as he screamed about curses and witchcraft, about the devil's silence and smoke-eyed women with fire in their bones. But Rachel didn't blink. "Fine," he growled. "You want to burn, you'll hang first." He dragged her across the yard to the old gallows post, left over from the early years of the plantation when runaways were made into warnings. The noose had long since rotted, but the iron shackles remained, bolted high and rusted red. They hoisted her arms above her head and locked her wrists in chains thick enough for oxen. The weight pulled her forward, spine curved like a question mark, legs barely touching the ground. Holt spit at her feet. "You'll swing like your mama did, but slower." Blood trickled down her arms from the iron's bite, her head slumped forward. Still, she said nothing. Mistress Caroline watched from the porch, trembling behind her lace fan as if afraid of what would come next. Night fell. The sky turned the color of bruised plums. Then the wind changed. It rose suddenly, sweeping across the fields in a gust so strong it rattled shutters and knocked over the feed barrels. And with it came the smell, smoke, not from the cookhouse, not from any hearth. This was something older, thicker, carried in the belly of the earth. The first flame bloomed near the slave quarters, small, curious. Then another in the middle of the cotton row. Then another and another, until the fields were veins of fire, stitched in perfect rows, blazing gold and red like the land itself had caught fever. Screams rang out. Chickens scattered. The cotton ignited like it had been waiting. From the gallows post, Rachel lifted her head. Her hair clung to her face, soaked with blood and sweat. Her lips cracked open, not for words, but for a smile. A slow, crooked, bleeding smile that gleamed in the firelight. She did not scream. She did not struggle. She burned upright, the chains groaning above her like the dying breath of an empire. And the fire answered her silence. The fire swallowed St. Laurent whole. Flames leapt from field to barn, from barn to house, as if the land itself had memorized Rachel's fury. The cotton went first, dry, oil-soaked rows exploding like kindling. Then the fences curled inward, blackened like old bones. Sparks climbed the shutters of the big house, lit the silks, the lace, the ledgers, everything that had ever whispered of ownership. Slaves ran into the woods barefoot, their faces lit by fire and freedom. Some wept. Some prayed. Some just ran, their chains left cooling in the dirt. No one saw Holt die. Some said he burned inside the barn, screaming with the animals. Others said he vanished into the river, chased by shadows only he could see. A few swear they saw him wandering the cane fields days later, skin blistered, muttering Rachel's name like a curse swallowed too late. Mistress Caroline was found 2 days later, curled on the floor of her parlor beneath the melted chandelier. Her dress was soot-streaked, her lips blistered. Her hair, once meticulously pinned, had gone bone white. She rocked herself in silence, humming something that sounded like a lullaby. Rachel's body was never recovered. When the fires died, all that remained at the gallows post were scorched earth and a pair of blackened chains, still bolted to the beams, swaying ever so slightly, though there was no wind. The land was sold at auction months later, but no one ever worked it again. Nothing grew where the fire had bloomed. Cotton seeds rotted in the soil. Wheat wilted before it broke ground. Even weeds turned yellow and collapsed. Dogs refused to walk the road past the fields, howling, then whining, then backing away with tails tucked low. And over it all lay a silence so deep it felt alive. A silence that didn't wait to be broken. A silence that remembered and kept watch. Years turned to decades. The plantation's name faded from deeds and memory, but the land never forgot. Where once cotton grew in thick white rows, now only brittle grass sways beneath a sky that always seems a little too gray. Trees line the edges like silent witnesses, branches low, bark scorched in places no fire should have reached. Locals call it the hollow acre. They don't plant there, don't build, don't linger. Some say it's cursed, others say it's sacred, but all agree something remains. On certain days, when the wind comes low and heavy from the east, you can hear the sound chains. Not dragging, but swinging, as though some invisible weight still hangs, suspended in the air above the dead earth. No birds nest there. No crickets sing. Children in St. Laurent dare each other to walk the old slave path that runs behind the collapsed barn. Most don't make it past the second fence post. But those who do speak of a single iron beam still standing crooked in the soil, rusted but solid, with blackened shackles dangling like hollow jewelry. They say if you stand quiet, very quiet, you'll feel it, heat rising from the ground. A breath that doesn't belong to the living. Hunters passing through report strange things, rifles jamming without cause, dogs whining and refusing to cross the cotton edge. Some swear they smell burning even on windless mornings, like charred cloth, like oil, like memory catching fire. And then there's old Thomas the gravedigger. He swears he saw her once, just once, on the edge of dusk. A woman walking the field in the shimmer of firelight, though no flame could be found, her back straight. Her dress clinging to her frame in the shape of old chains. Her hands bound in front of her like prayer. Her face turned toward him, eyes made not of flesh but smoke, not ghost, not woman, something in between, something walking. They asked him what he did when he saw her. He tipped his hat, turned around, and never stepped foot near the hollow acre again. Because some fires burn once, others walk forever. What would you do if your silence was the only weapon left, and your name was never meant to be remembered? Rachel's story is not just about fire, it's about every ancestor who was silenced, buried, or forgotten, yet still walks with us. If you felt something in your chest while hearing her name, if you know the weight of generational pain and the strength that rises from it, this story was for you. Subscribe to this channel for more untold stories that honor the struggle, the legacy, and the haunting power of Black history. Let them never forget, we remember.